All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Can anyone hear me, please? Good afternoon.
Yes, we can.
Oh, hi, Augustine. You're welcome to the May edition of our virtual meetup. All right, yeah. So we waited for 8 minutes. So I think if you can help broadcast this on your WhatsApp, Twitter, LinkedIn, we really appreciate so that we can have more people join us because our speaker for today, our facilitator for today is here. And for our meetup, we usually bring experts to train us on Power BI, yes, things related to Power BI. So this month we'll be talking about the best practices to visualize data in Power BI, and then I have my guy here to actually take us on that. His name is Bolaji. Hi, Bolaji, can you hear me?
Hi, Kulmi. Yes, I can hear you. Can you
Good
hear me?
afternoon.
Yeah, good
Yeah, very
afternoon.
clearly. You have the floor.
All right, just give me a moment. Let me share my screen. Okay. Let me see. It's not coming up. Why? All right. Okay. How many things I have running on my screen? Okay. Please confirm when you can see my screen.
Yes, good afternoon. I
Yeah, I can
can
see your
see your
screen.
screen. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Augustine. Okay, just check that I'm sharing the right slides. Let me see. All right. Okay. So we are good to go. Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, Thank you all for joining the session. It's 10 minutes past 2. So just before we start, I always like to let me first introduce myself. So, like Pelumi said, my name is Bolaji Olatunde. I'm a data and BI analyst, and I love to think around with Power BI, like many of us on this call. I have a background in economics, Microsoft Certified Professional, and you can connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn. Also, have a look at my portfolio to see a couple of stuff that I have created with Power BI, right? If that interests you. So, just before we begin, like I have introduced myself, I would love to also hear from you. Where are you joining us from? What do you do with data or with Power BI? Right, it's a conversation that we're going to have. So, love to hear get feedback. So you could either drop in the chat, just where are you joining us from, and what do you do with data and Power BI? So over the next 3 minutes, we just love to hear that. All right, what do you do with Power BI? And where are you joining us from? So Paul, anyone wants to just chime in? Where are you joining us from? Oh, we're joining from Lagos. I'm currently joining you guys from Ogun State. So what do I do with Power BI? I create visuals with Power BI, reports with Power BI. Okay, so Paul is also joining us from Ogun State as well, just like I am. And what do you do with Power BI, Paul? Do you use Power BI your day-to-day tool? How much do you work with data? Augustine, do you want to chime in? Samuel, do you want to chime in as well? So just the next minute and we would proceed. All right. Okay. Okay, so Paul says he uses Power BI for management real-time dashboard. That's interesting. So that Paul is doing a lot of management reporting. Okay, that's nice. And real-time dashboards. All right. Let's see. I think Augustine and Musa want to chime in something, so let's give them a few seconds. All right, Musa is joining us from Abuja. Oh, great. That's the North Central now. Yeah. Okay. And Musa, what do you do with Power BI or data? Okay. See, Augustine is also typing. Let's see. What they share with us. Okay, lots of typing. I'm expecting quite a few sentences from Augustine and Musa. Okay, so Augustine says, I'm not in conducive environment to talk. I'm joining from Abuja. Interesting. And I use data to aid me in managing my business inventory and track my spending habits. That is excellent, right? A personal application of the use of data. Wow, that's nice. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Augustine. And then we'll wait for Musa's response and before we proceed. So a couple of more sentences as well that would be expecting from Musa Yusuf. So hi Victor, thanks for joining us and you're welcome to the session. Okay, so Musa says I use Power BI to help businesses make better decisions through effective use of their data. Wow, that's great. That's very, very, very great. We are all using Power BI in one way to, do something that is either personal to us or to report to management or to help businesses make better decisions. And that is very excellent. Okay, so this afternoon, we would be talking about what data visualization best practices in Power BI. Now, I know this topic says best practices in Power BI, but what I want you to understand is data visualization isn't actually limited to Power BI. And as such, there are a couple of concepts that we can learn in data visualization that are not bound to a specific tool. So this afternoon, we're actually going to be discussing best practices or principles that are applicable across different tools. So long the activity that you're trying to do is to visualize data, right? If you're trying to do some data visualization of some sort, what we're going to be discussing this afternoon is actually going to help you um, better visualize your data. Okay, so what's going to be the agenda for this session? So our agenda for this session, first we would had a little introduction just like we have done, right? And then as part of the introduction of the session as well, we're going to discuss what is data and data visualization, what's the value of data visualization, and what's the beginning of the data visualization process. Next up, we'll look at some principles of visual perception, right? There's something called Gestalt principles. And that's is a set of principles that tells us how human beings tend to perceive certain visual elements, right? So when things are put in a certain way, how does the human eye, how does the human brain process that, right? So we look at the Gestalt principles of visual perception, and then we'll also look at something called form and function. So we are trying to make the decision of what kind of data visualization you should create. Sometimes you need to think about what's the form of the visualization and what's the function of the visualization. And then when you contrast those two together, you now reach a place where you can properly determine what is the best option for you, right, in terms of the visualization. And then once we discuss the form and function, it also looks at some general data visualization tips, some of which will be specific to Power BI. And then we'll do a bit of hands-on stuff in Power BI as well. And after that, we'll take some general Q and A. Right, so this is going to be a very interactive section. I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions, and I really look for us to chime in and respond either via the chat or by unmuting yourself and speaking very briefly for 10-20 seconds. So, first off, what is data visualization? Now, in your own words, I just want maybe one or two persons that would be willing to unmute themselves and just tell us when you hear the word data visualization, what comes to mind? How would you explain data visualization to someone? Right. So you could just unmute one or two persons, or you could chime in the chat. Um, what do you understand by data visualization? So just the next minute, I want to see if I can get any response from anyone, right? If you're willing to unmute, that'll be fine because that makes it very fast for us. And if you're too shy, don't be shy. You could just drop in the chat. What do you understand by data visualization? So anyone, just for next 30 seconds, if we get any response, that would be good. Okay, so anyone wants to chime in? Nobody. All right. Okay, so I would, well, since I haven't gotten any response, I would go with my own. Okay, I have Paul. So Paul says data visualization is conveying insights from data to help business make decision, or using infographics or charts or numbers. Okay, conveying insights from data to help business make decisions using infographics or charts or numbers. Excellent um, definition by Paul. And I like one key thing that he mentioned in there, which is what conveying insights, right? Conveying insights. Now, let's go into my own definition of data visualization. Now, I've extracted a definition from quite an author that I really appreciate, right? Called Nathan Yao, and he wrote a book called Data Points Visualization That Means Something. And in the chapter of the book, right, Nathan says this. He says, data is more than numbers, and to visualize it, you must know what it represents. Data represents real life, and it's a snapshot of the world in the same way that a photograph captures a small moment in time. Right, so data is not just a figure. Data is not just 2000 stored in a table. Data is not just 300.50 stored in a table. It's something. It's a something that represents real life, right? It's a snapshot of something that is happening in the world. Maybe for us, sometimes when we just carry data and we use it, we go to the internet and download something on cargo, for example, that has been randomly generated. You don't tend to understand the story or the representation behind that data. When you come maybe to like in a business setting, right, where the business is running and activities are happening day in, day out, right? Data is being generated and that data is a representation of what's happening in the business. Right. So when you think about it that way, you know that data is not just numbers, right? Data is a representation of something in real life. Now, having that understanding of data, another good, interesting author of mine that I also liked as well, which is his name is Andy Kirk, and in a book that he also wrote called "Data Visualization: A Handbook for data-driven design. He defined data visualization as this. He said, data visualization is the visual representation and presentation of data to facilitate understanding. And that's why I like the definition that Paul gave. The first two words in Paul's definition were what? Conveying insights. Now, if we drill down into the specifics of these um, two definitions or two explanations that we have here, there are two key things that exist here. The first one is, from the first one, you see that what data is more than numbers, and you must know what it represents before you can visualize it. And from the second definition that we can see that what data visualization is first the representation, right? So you must represent properly what that data has captured and then present what it is that you have from the data, but for one single purpose. And what is that purpose? To facilitate understanding. Now, if you are creating any data visualization that is not facilitating understanding, what you have just created is just art, right? You've put a couple of shapes together, put some letters on it, and made it look beautiful. You've created art. If your data visualization is not facilitating understanding, or like Paul said, it's not conveying an insight. Someone must be getting something from that visualization, and they must be understanding something from it for it to properly be termed data visualization. Now, with this definition of visualization, I want to give us a small snippet on how valuable data visualization is. Now, there is something called Anscombe's quartet, right? And in this Anscombe's quartet, what we have is we have a couple of visuals, right? A couple of data sets, let's put it that way. So in the first column here, so in the first column here, you see you have one, and this is just a data set that are supposedly related to each other. And this two is another set of X and Y variables are related to each other. And this one is another set of X and Y variables, and this another set of X and Y variables that are related to each other. Okay. Now, if we look at these some summary statistics about these two visuals, you see that what the mean is the same for both the X and the Y variables across board. And if you look at these numbers are quite different, right? Some of them are different for the Y variables, some of them are not. So you can see 19.8, still a mean of 9.0. This is a different set of values, still a mean of 9.0. So you look at some summary statistics, the mean is the same, the variance is the same, the correlation is the same. Even when you do a regression line, you still get the same intercept of 3 and a slope of 0.5. So to the ordinary eye, for someone that has gotten this data set and computed some statistics, they'll just be like, I don't know, what you're giving me is the same thing, right? You're giving me the same data. But let's take these values and plot them in a chart and see what we get. So taking all of these X and Y, these pairs of X and Y values, and we plot them in a chart, we then get this. Now, this is very interesting. All of those numbers that we saw that had the same summary statistics when plotted in the visual tell completely different stories. From the first one, we see a clear what's it called now? A clear positive relationship between that. But from the second one, based on the summary statistics, you think they both have positive relationships, but then this curvature is missing. You don't see that, oh, it goes up to a point, it peaks, and then it comes down. Or with this one where we have an outlier and this one we have an outlier as well. You don't see that from just numbers, right? Sometimes you need to communicate those things, right, with visuals. And this is just one small example of where just computing the sum, the averages, the variances, the standard deviations, or some set of equations might not be enough, right, to actually dig deep into what exists in that data Sometimes you need to visualize it and see how is this thing spread, what's the trend, what's the relationship between the variables that we have. So this is just a bit of a primer to help us appreciate, right, the value of data visualization process. Now, I started with a question when I started the session. I said, what do we do with data? And a couple of us gave a few responses, right, on how we use data and Power BI to do reporting, to manage our businesses, to manage our inventory, and a lot more things. Now, I want to ask one further question to that, right? Now, you said you do one or two things with data. I want to ask you one other question. When you are trying to do a data visualization, where does your process start? Or better still, what's usually the first thing that you do when you want to create a data visual, right? What's the first step that you take when you need to do some data visualization? So I want to get a few responses from you. Okay, so Augustine says the first step she does is gather data. Very good. All right. Anyone wants to chime in as well? What's the first thing you do in your data visualization process? So we have one response from Augustine. She says gather data. Anyone else wants to chime in? Okay. So she says ask questions. Now I'm confused. Which one is first? Is it gather data or is it ask questions, Augustine? So one response from everyone. Cayman, Paul, Samuel, Esther, Musa. Okay, so Augustina's clarified for us. She says ask question is first. Okay. So the first thing Augustine does when she's doing a data visualization is ask questions first. All right, thank you. And then she says, based on the answers, I gather the data. All right, okay, good. Anyone else wants to chime in? I saw someone typing now and then they stopped. So Esther, Paul, Musa, Victor, Cayman. Okay, so we have a response from Paul. Paul says the first step he does is to know what you wanted to convey, then you can choose the right visuals. Very, very good point. Know what you want to convey, then you can choose the right visuals. All right. Musa also says understanding the business problem. Excellent, excellent point so far, right? Someone said ask questions, another person says know what you want to convey. Someone says understand the business problem, and then Abdurrahman has chimed in and he says decide the goal of the visualization. And I want you four to give yourself a round of applause because you've given very, very good answers, right? Very good answers. So let's see what I have for you. Where should your data visualization process start? And my answer to that question is it should start with curiosity. The data visualization process should start with curiosity. And what do I mean by curiosity? Is it that there should be a need for the understanding that that visualization offers, or a question or series of questions that needs answers. And when we talk about curiosity, we can talk about curiosity from two parts. Now, you as the person that is going to be creating that visualization, you might have some questions or you might have some things that you want to understand, right? That is driving the need for you to first maybe get data and then analyze it and then visualize it. And for some of us that work in businesses, right? Typically what we get is that, oh, your boss just comes and tells you, hey, I want you to prepare a report for me that does XYZ. Now, many times those requests mean, although that instruction may not be enough for you to very well determine what it is that you want to do, or what it is that you want to achieve, or what's the message that that report or that set of visuals are supposed to convey. So when the need for that visualization is not coming from you directly, let's say it's coming as a request from a colleague or from someone that is senior, it is important for you to try to elicit from that person or to get from that person what is it that they want to understand when this report or when these visualizations has been created, right? What is it that they want to understand when this report has been created or when this visualization has been created? And the reason why that is important is because when you understand what the goal of the visualization is, like someone said, or when you understand what you understand, or when you understand what the message that they want to get, or what is it that they want to know from the data that they want you to visualize, when you understand that well enough, you are able to make good decisions further down the line that would facilitate that understanding. And that is why I believe that the first step, right, in your data visualization process is curiosity. Having a need for that visualization. There must be something, right, that needs to be done. So I would also leave us again with another good description as well from one of the authors that I've mentioned. And he says, you do not create a visualization because you happen to have data. You create a visualization because there's a definable need for the understanding it offers, whether a need by you or a need by someone else, right? There must be a need. There must be a reason why you are plotting that bar chart or why you are using that line graph or why you are creating that pie chart. There must be a need, right, for the understanding that we're going to get from that visual. So this is where that process starts from. And then once you understand the need from it, then you can go over the rest of the process that would include you getting the data, you analyzing the data, you applying all of the analytics techniques that you know and tools and whatever it is that you have to visualize that data. So now you've understood the data, right? That's the first best practice, if you will, is to what start with the curiosity, right? Start with the need to understand something. That's the first best practice, regardless of the tool. This is not a tool specific, um, not a tool specific principle, right? Regardless of any tool, you must start with the reason for the presentation. Now, you've gotten the need, you understand what the need for the visualization is. You've done your data gathering and everything, and now you're now trying to make decisions around how should you visualize that data. Now, there's a set of principles known as the Gestalt principles and something called pre-attentive attributes. So the Gestalt principles is a set of principles that helps us, that explains how we perceive information visually, right? And then pre-attentive attributes are those attributes that when we see them, there is already a premeditated way in the human brain that when they see it, right, they are going to perceive that information in a certain way. Right, so we're going to look at some of those gestalt principles and how they apply to visualization. The first of those principles is the principle of foreground and background. And if you're familiar with an author called Edward Tufte, right? If you're familiar with Edward Tufte, you must have heard something around where he says you should always have a high data to ink ratio. Now, the principle of foreground and background is just basically saying that you should create a contrast between the data that you want to communicate or the information that you want to communicate and the background of your visualization, right? Create a contrast between the information that you want to visualize and the background of the visualization. Now, if you look at the two um, charts I have here, you'd see in one here, there's very little contrast between these data bars that are in red and the background, right? That is in maybe a lighter shade of red. okay, compared to this one where the data point that I'm trying to visualize, they stand out from the background, right? And this is a very common principle that is applicable in visualization, because when you look at the visuals that some people create and they share on the internet, and then you see the background is this dark color that they put in, and then they take in another color that they put for their data bars or their line charts, and you almost cannot differentiate between the data point that they're trying to visualize and the background of the message, right, of the report or of the visual. So this is the first gist of principle, is that when you create a high contrast between the foreground, which is the data point that you're trying to visualize, and the background, right, the information that you want to communicate from your visualization is clear, right? So that's the first principle. The second principle is the principle of similarity, of simplicity, rather, the principle of simplicity. And the principle of simplicity is basically saying that if you want to present information, or if you want to present data in any way, keep it as simple as possible, right? Keep it as simple as possible. Help people understand it very easily. Look at this chart I have here. I'm communicating a couple of data points and I'm telling you one is higher than the other. Now, if I did not have this image in here, and oh, you just wanted to look at this and try and figure out which one is the first, which one is the second, which one is the third, which one is the fourth, you'd almost have to scan all 6 items every time you're trying to find the first one. So you say, oh, this one is the first, you look through everything, which one is taller, okay, this one is taller, okay, is this one taller than this one, oh, this one is taller than this one, then this one, oh no, sorry, it was this one, so it is 1, 2, 3, okay, 4, then 5, then 6, right? You've made it difficult for your audience to understand the information that you're trying to communicate. So the principle of simplicity is just what? Keep it simple, right? What you're trying to communicate, keep it as simple as possible, make it as easy as possible for your audience to understand it. And that's why you see down here, you just have what? Those bars are nicely sorted from the highest one to the lowest one. And within milliseconds, right, you can determine which bar has the highest value, which bar has the lowest value, which one is performing best, and which one is what? Performing the least. So that's the what? The third one. The fourth one is the principle of similarity. Now, what's the principle of similarity? The principle of similarity is saying that, well, when we see things that look alike, we tend to associate them together. Now, if we just look at these dots that we have here. Now, if I didn't tell you anything about these dots, right, and you just saw a couple of them in red and a couple of them in blue, your brain automatically assumes that there should be some form of relationship between what is in red. You don't know what it is, but there is just that preemption that there must be something related to them, right? Now, so when you're trying to communicate things that are supposed to be associated together, the principle of similarity is saying what? If you make things look similar, people will associate them together, right? If you make things look similar, people will associate them together. Now, look at this bottom chart here, right? This is my fake bar chart. Now, you would see that the first one here is this lighter red, and then this second and fourth one has a very deeper, maybe you call it wine or burgundy. I don't know colors, right? But let's call it wine, right? So that all of us are on the same page. So we have this wine color here, this wine color here. I don't have any labels or any data labels or any description of this, but you would assume, right, that these two, this second and third one mean something, and this one means something that is different from 1, 2, and 3. Now, when the brain is already making that pre-assumption, if you wrongly use that, now let's say you've added a couple of colors like this, and those colors that you have used to make things look similar don't actually represent anything, right? And you have this specific message in your mind. You've spent 4 hours doing your analysis, and you're like, yes, this is a banker insight. My manager is going to be very happy about this. But then you have misused this concept, this principle of similarity, and made things that are not actually similar. What's going to happen is your manager is going to sit down at the report, and you and him will sit down together, and you'll be getting one information. Your manager will be looking at it and be getting a completely different thing, right? Because how you have presented information is conveying something else based on how the brain naturally accepts things like that, right? So the principle of similarity again is this: when you want people to associate things together, if you keep them similar, right, by default, we would associate them as being the same or as being part of the same group. So that's the next one. That's the principle of similarity. The next principle is what? The principle of proximity, right? The principle of proximity is just simple. What's proximity? How things are close to each other, right? When you put things together closer to each other, you would almost assume that they are maybe part of a group, right? Things that are closer together will tend to be associated with together. Just like in this chart we have here, we have the first two joined together and the next four joined together. This could mean maybe I'm trying to differentiate our internal products from the product that we sell outside of Nigeria, for example. Because I've brought those together, even before I add my data labels, once I see the information, immediately think, oh, this is different from this, right? And now you can also see that the principle of proximity as well is applied together with the principle of similarity here with this dot is, yes, these two are broken out together by space, and that tells you that maybe this is different from this. But then when you look at the dots as well, you can almost see that even within that breaking out, right, the red dots still tell you there might still be some similarities between this one from this group and then this one from the other group, right? So the principle of proximity is what? Things that are in the same space that are close to each other, right, will tend to be associated together. And then we have the principle of enclosure as well, which is has a similar connotation to the principle of um, proximity. Enclosure just means that well, we box them into a space, right? So yeah, I take a couple of visuals, for example, and I put all of them in one border, let's say in a report, right? What would happen is that you would just think that, oh, all of these associated visuals might relate to one key message, right? Because I've boxed them into one report. So that's the principle of enclosure. And then the principle of connection is what? When things are connected by lines, we tend to associate that well, there's a relationship between them, right? When things are connected by lines, we tend to associate the relationship between them. The relationship could be direct. It could mean that maybe there is a subset of this, but just drawing lines between objects, right, would almost make you think that there's a relationship between them. And then the last one is what? The principle of focal points, right? The principle of focal points. So the principle of focal points is what? When you make things stand out, right? Or if you want to draw people's attention to something else, you can make that specific item or that specific element so distinct from every other thing that everyone's focus would be drawn to that. I'm sure when I went to this slide first, the first thing that popped up to you is this blue star right at the top, right? Because it is completely different from every other thing. Right? How is it different? It's different both in color, it's different both in the shape that it is. Also looking at our mini chart illustration here, even while applying the proximity, the simplicity and the similarity, you can still almost still draw attention to this particular bar here by just making it a bit more distinctive, right, from every other thing. So the more you can make things distinctive from what is in their environment, you can drive the focus of your audience, right, to that specific element, or in the context of data visualization, to that specific data point or that specific message, right? So this is the gestalt principles and the principles of pre-attentive attributes, right? So that is the next practice that I wanted to convey to us, which is that when trying to visualize data in Power BI, sometimes you want to create your visualizations in a way that supports the natural perception of the human mind or of the human brain. When the human brain sees something, you can think of this is like a what is a mixture of psychology and this thing, right? Or and data. But I mean, every visualization you create is going to be read by human beings, right? So if you understand how the human beings work and you try to create visuals in a way that supports how human beings work, then the time that people take to understand what it is that you've created will be reduced to seconds from minutes or reduced to minutes from hours, right? So that's the core practice here that I'm trying to pass across, or the core message I'm trying to pass across is what if you can take the principles of how human beings perceive information and apply that in the process of creating your visualization, then you would communicate information or communicate your insights much more faster. All right. So recapping now, we said what first, what start with curiosity, right? Be curious, have a need for your visualization, and then two, we said what apply the principles of what visual perception, the gestalt principles of visual perception. Align your visualization with how human beings naturally what perceive information. The next point that I want to make is what your visual vocabulary. Okay, a visual vocabulary. Now, what do we mean? What's vocabulary? I think vocabulary is a common word that we use day to day. So, what do we mean by vocabulary? Right, anyone wants to just chime in? Let me see. Maybe my understanding of vocabulary is different from your own understanding of vocabulary. So maybe one or two persons just drop a message. When you hear the word vocabulary, what does it mean? Right? Choice of words, exactly. Right? Because it says choice of words. Yes, that's what vocabulary is. It's just a choice of words. Now, when we put visual to the back of vocabulary, what does that mean? A choice of visuals. Okay, Geminat is typing, and Augustine is also typing. So let's see. So that's visual vocabulary is what you said. Choice of words. Visual vocabulary is what choice of visuals. Okay, Geminat says English grammar. Yeah, that's vocabulary. Choice of words to be used to describe a visual body of words. Yes, all correct when we're describing vocabulary. And then when we apply visual to that and say visual vocabulary is what your choice of visuals. Now, let's say for me, for example, now, if you put me in a space with a Chinese man, I think the only thing I'll be able to communicate with that person is maybe ni hao, because I've heard this somewhere, and I think ni hao means what, how are you, or something like that. Or Spanish, maybe if I can still remember any Spanish from Dora the Explorer that I used to watch then. Maybe that's probably the only, the only foreign language I know right now, aside from my indigent language. And because I'm limited, even within English language, right? Because I'm limited by vocabulary, there are some ways I cannot communicate with people, right? If they put me in a room with a lawyer and they say we should speak legal terms. I mean, I would at some point maybe I'll start rapping because I don't have anything to say to the lawyer that would be legal terms, right? My legal vocabulary is near zero. Let me not disgrace myself, but it's near zero, right? So then when you say visual vocabulary is what? Do you have different ways of communicating a specific information, right? Do you know different choices of visuals of communicating a specific information? And why this is important is because if you are limited in your visual vocabulary, if you are limited in the options of visualizations that you know, right? You might be limited in how you can communicate certain insights. Now, in the business case now, there's quite a level of standardization in the business case, in the sense that almost every kind of reporting in business follows a certain number of rules or follows a certain pattern. And there's even an organization that has set out to create a standard into how we communicate data in business. Right? If you've heard of the IBCS, right, which basically stands for what International Business Communication Standard, they've tried to create a standard on how you communicate business. But there will still be edge cases, maybe outside of business or even within business, there will still be edge cases where you are trying to communicate something and you just can't think of how am I going to even describe this thing. And that's why it's important to improve your visual vocabulary. Now, on the concept of visual vocabulary, I want to share with us a very interesting resource, right? And this was put together by the Financial Times, and it's called, well, as you might guess, visual vocabulary, right? And the Financial Times visual vocabulary it's like an overview of different visualization options that you can use to communicate specific types of messages. So I'm going to zoom in into some of them now, right? I'm going to zoom in into some of it, and so that we can see some of what we have here. So in the first group here, we see we have what? We have deviation, right? We are trying to communicate deviation, and deviation says what? Emphasize variations from a fixed reference point. Typically, the reference point is zero, but it can also be a target or a long-term average. So you are trying to visualize deviation. What options do you have to visualize deviation? Now we can see what diverging bar, diverging stacked bar, spine, surplus or deficit field line. How many of us have seen this kind of visualizations before? Just drop in the chat. From these examples I've given for deviation, if you've seen them before, just type yes, I've seen them. If you've not, say, oh, this is new to me. Just drop it in the chat just to see, right? What do we understand basically? What are the options that we know? What do we know about when it comes to visualizing? Like, let's say someone say you should visualize what deviation, or we want to see how things deviate, right? Did you know of these four options, right? Or are they new to you? Okay, so Musa says this is new to me. Abdurrahman also says this is new to me. Now, imagine. All right, so Augustine says not seeing the diverging charts before. Good. Now, imagine you actually had the need to visualize some form of deviation. So your boss is asking you to say, "Oh, we know we set out a couple of benchmarks for our sales reps, for example, then say, oh, every sales rep should be hitting a target of what uh, let's say 100,000 every month in sales from a specific line of business or from a specific product, and you now wanted to communicate that in a visual. Now, prior to this, a couple of us have said that this is new to us. What would you have explored to visualize that deviation in a way that your boss would immediately get from it and say, oh, these are the sales reps that are performing fine, these are the sales reps that are not, in a glance? How would you have done that, right? If you did not have the vocabulary. Okay, how would you have done that if you did not have the vocabulary? And that's why it's important to improve your visual vocabulary. Have multitude of ways of what of visualizing things. Let's look at a couple of examples here that the Financial Times has provided. So in the second group here, we have what correlation. Now, how can we visualize correlation? What options do we have to visualize correlation? Now, I know many of us, when we think of correlation, the first thing that comes to our mind is what? Scatter plot. Just put X, Y, put dot, 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 and draw the whole thing, right? That's correlation, and it's true. The scatter plot is one way to visualize the options, the relationships between those two items, and you have a connected scatter plot. But I'm pretty sure many of us did not think of this before, or have maybe I've not thought about this before. A column and a line as a way of visualizing correlation, right? And what is correlation? Correlation is what? How two things are moving together. So I can put I can put one value on my columns and put another value on my lines. And then from the shape of my columns becoming smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller each time, right? That's one trend. And then I can look at my line chart and see, oh, this is how my line chart is moving. And that's another trend, right? So using the column and the line chart is another way to visualize correlation. A scatter plot is something that may not be easy for certain audiences to understand. Do you get? It may not be easy for certain audiences to understand. In a business setting, for example, it might be more easy to show correlation using a bar chart and a line chart, like we've seen here, a column and a line chart, than to use a scatter plot. And while when you're maybe in an academic setting or a scientific setting, a scatter plot is familiar. Everybody knows what the scatter plot is within the academic setting, right? So that's one way of doing what correlation. And then we also have what a bubble map. And we also have a heat map, right? Maybe we may not have thought that heat map shows correlation. If you think about what the heat map does, you have something on the rows, you have something on the bottom. Yeah, a heat map is one way to also show correlation, right? So that's correlation. Let's look at what other things we have here. We have ranking, right? We want to show how things are ordered. And you see we have what ordered bars, ordered columns, ordered proportional symbol, dot dot strips, dot strip plot as a twister there. We have a slope to show you how things are moving across time. Oh, it was the first year, now it has dropped. You have a lollipop chart, which is the different version of a bar chart, and you have a bump chart, right? We just show how maybe one item is moving through different ranks, right? Look, it was fifth, then it moved to fourth, then it came down to fifth, then it moved to third, then it moved to second, then it moved to first, and then dropped. So this is a bump chart, for example, right? What else do we have? We have distribution. We have different options of visualizing distribution, histogram, dot plot, dot strip plot, box plot, violin plots, population pyramid, cumulative curve. What else do we have here? We have the changes over time. You can visualize changes over time using a line chart, using a column chart, a column and a line, a slope, an area chart, candlestick, like with the finance guys. And if you trade, right, you're familiar with that. We have a fan chart. We are trying to show, projections after a certain point in time. You have a connected scatter plot. You even have what the calendar heat map, right? Where you have a calendar as a background, right? And then the boxes are the specific days of the month. You can show trends with that as well. We have the Priestley timeline, which you can use to show, do some project management stuff, right? You have circle timeline, you have vertical timeline, you have a lot of ways to visualize. This is just what changes over time, right? Changes over time, a lot of ways to visualize changes over time. And then you have ways of visualizing magnitude, parts to whole, or even spatial data, right? Spatial data is what? Data in maps. See, we have different types of maps. We have what? The basic chlorophyll map, proportional symbol flow map, contour map, equator map, different types of maps, right? Dot density, heat map with geographical data and all of those. But the point I'm trying to make here is this: when you have more ways of visualizing something, right? You you when you know different visuals that you can use to communicate the message, it becomes easier for you to communicate that message. And that's the whole goal of data visualization, right? How do we communicate that message? Okay, how do we communicate that message? So we've looked at what improving your visual vocabulary, right? How do you improve your visual vocabulary? Let's see what the next thing that I want to discuss is what something called form and function, right? Form and function. And when we talk about form and function basically means that for every chart choice that you have, or every chart that you can create as a standalone visualization or for reporting, they typically would fall in one of these categories. It's a static or interactive, right? So it can be more static or more interactive. That's when talking about the form, of the visualization. Or when you look at the x-axis, it can be what serving a different function from either being a visual primarily for explanatory purposes or a visual primarily for exploratory purposes. Okay, so every visualization that you create for a specific need would fall in this group, right? So is it a static visualization? So if you look at the top right corner here, right, in the top right corner here, we have what static and exploratory. So when you're creating a visual that is static and is supposed to be exploratory, you know that this visual is static. But the function that you want that visual to do is to give the user the ability to explore the data on their own. Now, in that case, you know that that static visualization needs to provide the user with a lot more information, a lot more explanation, a lot of things that can guide them into exploring the data for their own self. Okay, that's what a static and exploratory visual. If we come here to the bottom right, what we have interactive and exploratory, which is where many of what we create in Power BI within the business setting probably falls in, right? You're creating an interactive report or an interactive visualization. And sometimes the purpose of that interactive visualization is for somebody to go into that dashboard or go into that report and now sit down and start to look at it. What happened here? And something sales dropped from January to March. Oh, I click on March and then I see another set of visualizations that tells me these were the products that dropped. So the purpose of that one result is exploratory. Now, when the purpose of the visual is exploratory, you're going to design it in a different way. You're going to create it with a different set of things in mind. Now, for a static and exploratory visualization, like I said, you are probably going to be adding a lot more annotations. You're going to be adding a lot more descriptions because there is nowhere for the user to click to get more information. There is no pop-up that you can add to it. It is just there on their screen, and they need to be able to get everything that they're going to have. Unlike an interactive one where you can leave some things to when the user clicks a button, right? You can leave something to when the user clicks a bookmark or drills down to a specific point, right? That's interactive and it's also giving them the option to explore. Okay, that is a different set of visualization with its own ways of being created because the purpose or the form and the function is it's going to be interactive, but the function is it's going to be exploratory. If we look at the one on the bottom left here we're looking at explanatory and interactive. Interactive meaning that the user can click and see things change and get different feedback from the report or from the visualization. But it is explanatory in the sense that even when they click or interact with your visual, the message that you want them to get from it, right, is clear. So an example of this within Power BI will be something like this dynamic text that you have, right? You create a text that has some dynamic inputs in it, and then the user selects let's say they select a particular region, and that text just updates to tell them that, oh, this specific region made a sale of XYZ amount 2003, but it dropped by 2% in compared to 2002. And this 2%, you can see that if we break it down by product, we had this product contributing this much to the drop, this one contributed to an increase to this, and this one contributed to a decrease to that. And then they click another region, and then that explanatory text changes again. Now, when it is in a static point, you don't have that text information or that explanation changing. But because it's going to be interactive, you can create that visual or that text summary to respond to the user's interactivity or to the user's interaction or to the user's exploration of your visual. So how you will create a static but exploratory visual is different for you how you will create an interactive and explanatory visual. And if you look at the last one here, which is static and explanatory. This is a visualization that is what? Static and is explanatory. And is this kind of visuals that you would have in your PowerPoint presentations, where you are making a presentation, you have visual, right? And that visual is going to be static, nobody's clicking on it. But at the same time, in that visualization, the message, right, or the understanding that you want the users or the audience to get from it is clear. So it is static, and then you've added everything that you can use to make sure that what you want to communicate in the visual is there. Maybe you've highlighted certain regions, you've highlighted certain categories, you've provided titles and subtitles, you've labeled all your axes appropriately, such that when they see the information, they don't even need you to understand what the message that you are trying to pass across is. How you would design such a visual is different from how you would design another one. Now, almost every visualization will fall in one of these quadrants based on their form and function. And it's very important for you to know what kind of form and function would be appropriate, okay, for the kind of visualization they are trying to create, or for the audience they are creating that visualization for. Okay, all right. So we are 1 hour in right now, and I want to take any questions if there are any. So for the next 2 to 5 minutes, we've discussed a couple of things so far. If you have any questions, I just want to give a window of 2 to 5 minutes for you to ask that question, and then we'll continue with the session. So if I don't get any response within the next 10 seconds, I would assume that we are all following through. And if you're following through and you're learning something from it, just type in the chat learning, right? If you're picking anything so far from what we've discussed, just type in the chat learning so that I know that we are all together and we are actually getting something out from the discussion that we're having. So I'd love to get that feedback for the next 2 to 5 minutes. If you're learning, just type learning. If it's you're not learning, just type nah, I'm not learning anything, right? If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat or just unmute, and then I'll make sure I'll see that everyone is following. Okay, all right. I'm getting a couple of learning. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you for the feedback. Yes, so I assume we are proceeding fine and there has not been any questions yet. So let's recap. What have we discussed so far? We first said that we start with the why. Let there be a curiosity that your visualization is trying to achieve. Now you've defined that curiosity, you've gotten everything that you need. Now you're trying to create your visualizations. I said what next? I said what? Try to what? Create your visualizations in a way that supports the natural perception of the human mind. How do people naturally perceive visual information? And we looked at a couple of what? Gestalt principles and pre-attentive attributes. Okay, and then we talked about what the visual vocabulary, being able to speak different kinds of language of visuals helps you have multiple ways of communicating information visually, right? Remember, the goal of visualization is to what? To facilitate understanding or to convey insights. So having multiple ways of communicating that insight makes you very effective in finding the right way to communicate information. And then next we talked about what? Form and function. Another form and function, we talked about how the form and function of the visualization would guide how it's going to be created, right? When you're creating a static but explanatory visual versus a static but exploratory visual, what other elements do you need to add to the visualization to augment that understanding, right? When you know it's going to be interactive, what can you make possible in the visualization for your audience to understand the message? Okay, so That is where we are at now. And so after looking at all of these principles, right, I personally like to think that when it comes to reporting or creating data visualizations, there are two parts to it, right? There are two parts to creating data visualization. And the first of that part is what? What do I even want to visualize, right? Your boss came to you to do XYZ. Uh-huh. So what do I even want to visualize? And knowing what to visualize is what we've actually talked about so far, right? You found the pain points or the questions that are or the curiosities that you're trying to satisfy, right? They all feed into what you want to visualize. You know what the data that you want to show, right? You know how you want to construct that data. You know if it's a line chart or a bar chart or what kind of chart choice is going to be what valuable, right, to communicate that insight. That's the what to visualize, and to me, it's the most important part because once you know what to visualize, right, once you know what to visualize, how to visualize it is usually easier. Because in the words to visualize, you're just there trying to understand what's the focus of the visualization and how the required data can be presented to communicate the desired message. So you are not worrying about how do I do this in Power BI? How do I do this in Excel? How do I do this in Tableau? No. You're just trying to focus on this is what has been requested. This is data that I have, and these are the options that I have to visualize it. Now, if I go for this option, right, you've narrowed down. Okay, yes, this is how I'm going to present this information. The next step is now okay. Since I know I want to create my bar chart in this way and highlight it in this way and do this in that way, how do I achieve this in Power BI? How do I achieve this in Excel? How do I achieve this in Tableau? How do I achieve this in whatever visualization tool that you are using to prepare the information? How to visualize is more about understanding how to technically do it in the tool that you have. If I want to create a visual that is going to highlight certain elements on a bar chart, for example, I want to highlight maybe the first and the last one. How I would do it in Excel is different from how I would do it in Power BI, it's different from how I would do it in Tableau, right? But when I take my mind off the technical aspect of it and just think of my data and analyze my data, right? And then after analyzing my data, I see yes, this is the information I want to convey, and this is how I want my visualization to be presented. Then I go back and now start to think or start to research on how do I do this in Power BI. And the reason why it's important to do this is because when you take out the technical constraint on how to visualize data and you focus on the understanding, right, or on the message that you want your data to communicate, many times you have a much more effective visualization than if you started worrying about how to technically do something. So you are trying to prepare a report. You did not think first about what's the message that you want to do, right? You did not think first about what are the questions that you want to analyze. You just went into Power BI. You just started dragging visuals and dropping visuals, and then you just created something and you're good to go. There might have been other ways for you to um, visualize that data, but because you started with technically using Power BI, right? Your mind won't even go to things that you are not yet familiar with how to do it. Don't know if I'm making any sense. If you're trying to do something in Power BI, you just start bringing you're dragging visuals and dragging data and putting and trying to create something. Many times you would stay in a place that you are comfortable with what you're visualizing, right? You won't even explore different ways of trying to present that information because in the first place you didn't even think about what's the point of this visualization I'm trying to create. Like I said, if you create visuals that does not have a desired message, You just created art. You've not communicated anything. It's just picture. You might as well just turn it to an NFT and sell it on the crypto markets if people will buy it. Sha. But if you create visuals to communicate information, right? First start by not worrying about the technical how to, right? Focus on what it is that you want to communicate. And when you are settled on what it is that you want to communicate, then you start figuring out how to. Now, I'm not saying you cannot start in Power BI when you want to do it, because after a while, when you've built competence on how to use Power BI or how to use a tool, you can actually start that exploratory process of trying to understand the data and trying to figure out what questions you can answer with it. You can start that in Power BI because you've built that technical skill. You're no longer limited by what you can technically do in the tool. You have a lot more competence in the use of the tool. But if your competence level is still a bit low, you're trying to build it, it's always quite nice, right? That you start in an environment that you are not constrained by what you know how to do with the tool, right? You start in an environment that you are just trying to understand what it is that you're going to visualize and what it is that you're going to report. And then after you now try and figure out how you are going to do it in the tool. So for me, these are the two parts to creating visualization and even to reporting, right? When you understand the message and what it is that you want to communicate, then worry about how it is that you're going to do it in the report. So to recap what it is that we have talked about so far, right? Or to add to what it is that I've talked about so far, other points or tips that I just want to mention right before we go into Power BI and do maybe 20 to 25 minutes of some experimentation or description of what it is that we've talked about. Just want to mention a couple of other tips. And the first one is something that I've talked about this afternoon, which is what use the right charts and improve your visual vocabulary. Sometimes not knowing what charts to use is because you don't know what other visual options you have. So you improve your visual vocabulary and also always make sure that you're using the right chart to communicate the right kind of information. Don't use a pie chart when you're trying to visualize series over time. Don't use a bar chart when you're trying to show the impact of geographical position, right, on a particular metric. I wouldn't see it from a bar chart like I would see it from a a map, for example. If I'm trying to communicate to someone that, oh, we actually are selling the north in the northwest and in the southeast, and then I now put a visual of let's say a list of all the states in Nigeria, for example, and I put their sales value. And I'm expecting that my reader, when they see the first three states, they will know whether it's in the southeast or in the southwest. Fine, they may know if their geography is very good, right? But let's say that geography is not very good, and I just put a map of Nigeria. Sorry for those that are joining us from outside Nigeria, but let's say I put a map of Nigeria, for example, and then if there's a bit of a heat map where I can see a lot of concentration in the northeast and a lot of concentration in the northwest, the time it would take for them to get that message I was trying to pass across, right, will be lesser when considering the map than when considering the bar chart. Now, the bar chart will be effective when I'm trying to communicate a message of, oh, which region did we sell to the most, and which region did we sell to the least. The bar chart might be a faster way to communicate that information compared to the map. When the map is when the map might communicate something like, oh, where is our sales concentrated in, right? Might be communicated faster with the map than it will with a bar chart. Or for example, I'm trying to communicate precise values. I want to see what exactly was the sale that we made. I want to see it down to the decimal. Then I'm probably better off putting that in a table than to put it in a chart. Because in a chart, in a bar chart, for example, the focus of that bar chart is what? You're just trying to rank things, right? Oh, this is higher than this is higher than this is higher than this. Because when I'm looking at the bar chart, sometimes I don't even look at the number on the bar chart. What do I look at? I look at the length of the bar. Oh, this one is taller than this one. Okay, this one that is taller, who is it? Oh, it's Benue. Oh, it's taller than Jigawa. Okay, Benue has more sales than Jigawa. That's all. That's the first thing you get from a bar chart. When it's in a table, right, you put Benue and you put your numbers. Right, let's say you sort it. Fine, I might see that Benue comes from Jigawa, but the next thing I'm looking at is the specific sale of Benue or the specific sale of Jigawa. So when you're trying to communicate precision, for example, about a table I communicate precision better than a bar chart. Now, can you add data labels to a bar chart? Yes, you can. But that's not the first thing your audience will see. But if that's the first thing you want to communicate, then you're better off using a table than using a bar chart. Now you see how I've picked the same data of what state and sales and used three different visualizations to describe how you can communicate different levels of precision, different kinds of message. But you won't be able to do this if you don't know one, what's the right chart to communicate that kind of message, and two, what are the options that I have. So improve your visual vocabulary and use the right charts. Number two is don't stick to defaults. Now, 9 times out of 10, what a visualization tool or Power BI might generate for you out of the box may not be the best option. Now, I'm not saying that sometimes it's not going to be good. Yes, it's going to be good. Even now, there's a specific team on the Power BI that is trying as much as possible, like working so much to make sure that you can almost create very good visualizations based on defaults, right? But as at now, or even after then, you may not don't try not to stick to defaults. Now, in the quest of not sticking to defaults, I'm not saying that you should now go and become what's it called? What's the name of this of this artist now? I don't remember the name. I'm not saying you should now become Dora the Explorer and then you just start exploring everything and then you have a bar chart, you have 300 colors on your bar chart, or you, because I say don't stick to default, you click something, Power BI gives you a bar chart, you say no, I want to use a bar chart, a pie chart. No, don't stick to default just means that many times out of 10, what Power BI will give you out of the blues or um by default may not be the best option that you have. So as much as possible, you want to make your own inputs because it is your data and it is your information and it is your insights. You are the one that knows what you want to communicate. Power BI does not know. It just does what you ask it to do. That's the second one. Third point is one, reduce clutter. What do we mean by clutter? Clutter is anything on your visual that does not help you communicate insights. Anything on your visual that does not help you communicate insights. Now, we like to use icons. Icons are great, but there's a good way and a bad way to use icons. If you're putting an icon on a visual and that icon does not support explaining or does not help explain that chart, for example, you might as well not put the icon. Because instead of using the icon to support your explanation, you are going to be distracting your audience by the icon. Right? That's just an example. Or you, let's say for example you're plotting a line chart, right, and you're plotting, let's say, monthly sales, for example, and on on your axis, on your x-axis, you already have your month: January, February, March, April, May, June, July, and so on. You don't need to now add an axis title telling us that this is month. Every normal human being that says January, February, March, April, May, June knows that is month. So adding months again as a title on that axis is clutter, right? You can do away with that. We can do away with that information without losing what it is that you're trying to communicate. Okay, so reduce clutter. Next one, design with consistency using themes. Right, so Power BI has themes. We'll look at that shortly. So Power BI has themes, and you can use themes to design with consistency. And what do I mean by that? You can set a set of colors and say, okay, these are my data colors, these are my background colors, these are my colors for icons, and all of those things. You set that within your theme, so that anytime you are trying to create something in Power BI, you're applying those themes. You're not going to use a different shade of blue on one page and another shade of blue on another page. No, because you've defined it in your theme, right, that this is the color, you can always know with 100% guarantee that when I go and click on this thing, I will pick the right color. Okay, so that's design with consistency using themes. Next point is what? Start with gray and use colors strategically. I think I've mentioned this in passing, but it's not every time you just use your visualizations or your report to use a lot of colors. No, it's not every time you do that, right? Many times, if you're not sure on how to use color, dump everything on your visuals to just gray, and then now start to use colors to strategically draw the attention of your user, right? To say, okay, this is where I want the user to look at. This is where I want the user to look at. That is where I want the user to look at. So start with gray and use colors strategically. And then my last point specific to Power BI is what? Use measures to drive formatting. Now, this point is from um, a maintenance point of view, right? There will always be more than one way to do something in Power BI. Many times there will always be more than one way. If amongst those more than one ways that you have for doing something in Power BI when it comes to visualization, if you have a way that you can use a measure, right, to drive that change or to drive that to apply what it is that you're trying to do. If there's a way you can use a measure to do it, use a measure to do it. And why am I saying you should use a measure? Use a measure because you can reapply that measure to multiple visuals, right? So, for example, I want to highlight sales that are above a certain amount, right, with red, and then those that are below a certain amount with, let's say, gray. If I go into that specific chart, I can click, 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 and do it. But if I have a measure that I've already embedded that logic in, anywhere I need to apply that logic, I just go to that measure and use the measure in the report. So that's why I said Power BI specific now, use measures to drive formatting. All right. So this is the end of my talk. And we have just about 30 minutes to go. So we've talked about a lot of theory, and I want us to do a bit of practical and demo and just show us a couple of applications of some of the things that we have talked about. So begin before I proceed again to the demo. Do we have any questions? Okay, so I see a hand raised. All right, I think Elvis, you can ask your question.
Okay, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Davis.
Okay, thank you so much. I've learned a lot. So my question is on the form and function. Now,
Okay.
when you are building a dashboard or a report, considering form and function, um,
Mm-hmm.
you since the stakeholders are the end users of this report or the dashboard. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what type of stakeholders do we um, do we consider when we are looking at the different combinations of forms and functions? I don't know if you understand the.
Okay. Yeah, I think I get your question, right? So basically you're saying what kind of audience will a specific combination of form and function be more appropriate to, and which scenarios would one designing one in one way be more appropriate than designing one in another way? Yeah. That your question?
Yes, that is on what type of stakeholders do we call? Yes, as in basically
Yeah.
the question.
Okay, all right, that's good. Now I'll give you just to give you a couple of illustrations to that regard. So let's say we are preparing a report or a visualization for top level executives, right? high level CEO, um, management level, those people are the CEO, the C-suite executives, right? That's what I'm looking for. Now, these people are those that will not really care a lot about. They're not going to they're not going to spend a lot of time looking at your reports, and they don't really care a lot about the details. They just want high level information. Right now, this right, because we're using Power BI to create that report, right? If we created an interactive report in Power BI, now by default Power BI is interactive, right? But when we talk about interactive in the sense that the user needs to interact with the report to get more information. So I can design a static report in Power BI that is not exactly static, but when I say that the report is static, it's static in the sense that the user does not need to interact to get more information. So all of the information that they need is just right there in front of them. Or to put it more simply, the level of interaction that they need is lower. So um for C-suite executives, for example, that are not going to be spending a lot of time looking at the report and you're going to be presenting high level information for them, most likely you're going to be presenting something that is less interactive and more explanatory, right? They don't have the time to be exploring, to trying to understand, oh, what do you happen, what do you hear? But once you just is less interactive, very explanatory, they come in there, they see, oh, we are down by this amount, down by that amount, down by that amount, down by that amount. Now, typically, a C level is, I'm guessing most times a C-suite executive would then ask the department heads, oh, why did that happen? Why did that happen? Why did that happen? Now, for those department heads, you most likely be creating a interactive and more exploratory visualization because for them, they would keep probing and asking questions to understand what is happening within their own business segment. They will, yes, they have a couple of big static figures they're looking at on their screen, but they are going to be exploring the data a bit more than a C level executive would, right? Now, because it's Power BI, a lot of things are going to be happening in the interactive side. And so we'll be moving mostly between what's more explanatory or more exploratory. So line level managers, for example, who tend to have more exploratory and interactive reports. C-suite executive would have less interactivity but more explanatory. Now, visualization is not limited to only Power BI. Sometimes you are creating reports that are going to be consumed by the public. Take, for example, agencies, governmental agencies. There are people that work with the government, right? There are people that work with NGOs, and they churn out certain reports every year, every month, every quarter. Those reports are going to be in publications, for example. And in those cases, those publications are going to be what's highly static. Now, because they're highly static, depending on the kind of information that they have or the audience that they want, then they have a choice to say, okay, we're going to be creating very static. Now, are we creating more exploratory or more explanatory? So when we're creating more exploratory in the sense that when the user sees this static report, they are still trying to read and figure out more things for themselves. Now, you might be thinking that how do you even achieve an exploratory visual with something that someone cannot click? Yes, you can, because there's going to be a lot of information on that static report. It's not something that you get information with at a glance. No, it's something that you will sit down with and read. I don't know if many of us, if we use, there's this book called I think Atlas, right? That has like representation of geographical information. Atlas has geographical information presented somewhere. You cannot open a page of Atlas and just grab what it is that you want. You will sit down and read the pages of the report, right? There are a couple of reports later that are presented by maybe the World Bank or WHO. They are static in nature, but you read it to explore what is happening in that report. And then there will be some that just at a glance you get the information. XYZ happened, improved by this happened, improved by that. Is there, bam. It's static, fully explanatory. They're communicating something to you. They're not telling you that you can get something out of this. Right? They're communicating something to you. So I would say maybe as a rule is that The less time, well, let me put it this way, maybe let me put it like this. Maybe the less time your audience have to interact with your report, the more static and less interactive that is going to be, and then the more explanatory and less exploratory it's going to be. And then the more time your audience has to sit with your report, the more interactive that you can make it be, and then the more exploratory time you can make it be. And maybe I might even add again the maybe the more concerned that they would be, or the more interested that they would be, right, in certain data points, the more interactive and exploratory it would make um, that report be. So I'll leave it at that and let me know if that answers your question, or at least provides some form of thoughts or guidance around that.
Okay, definitely, it answers my question, but that leads me to one other question. I don't know. So does that mean that in a typical organization, you might have to create like um, different versions of the same report for different levels of stakeholders?
No, yes and no, and every report you create, we agreed at the beginning of this session that every report is created to facilitate understanding, and you must create every report within the context of the audience that is going to be looking at reports. I'll tell you for a fact that if we are, let's say me and you are in an organization, right, and then you happen to be my line manager, and then there's a CEO in the organization, there's a very high chance that the level of detail that the CEO is interested in is not the same thing as the level of detail that a line manager is interested in. There's a very, very high chance. Or take, for example, a sales manager that has a couple of sales reps under him and the CEO. If I create a sales report for a sales manager and a sales report for a CEO, I can't give them the same report because they're not interested in the same level of detail. A sales manager is probably much more concerned not just about the overall performance in sales as a whole, but also about people that are reporting under him, right? How are they performing? Or take, for example, HR, right? The kind of HR report you prepare for an HR manager, it's not the same HR report you prepare for a CEO, right? HR is probably more concerned about who is leaving, who specifically is leaving, why are they leaving. But when you go to the CEO, you're communicating with the CEO at a very high level to say, okay, these are the big numbers, this is how these numbers are trending down, and this is what we're doing to improve it. The CEO is done, he has other things to worry about. So, yes, different audiences, right, require different perspective of the same data. So quite often the same kind of presentation or the same presentation of data would not fit many audiences, right? It may not fit many audiences. There will be reports that will be appropriate for a group of audiences or similar audiences, but there would also be reports that you really just have to take a different perspective or a different level of detail to that report for it to fit the other audience they are trying to present it for.
Thank you very much.
All
That's all.
right, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for the question. And I hope you all picked 18 or 2 from that. So over the next 20 minutes, let's see what we can do in Power BI. So just to show us a couple of things here and there that we can do in a Power BI. So to give us a case or an understanding of what data we're going to be looking at. So let's say you're a data analyst in an organization. The head of sales has asked the insight and analytics team to prepare a report that shows the financial performance of the business. And the head of sales wants to be able to understand the financial state of the business each month, identify growth opportunities and pain points, and help the business plan for the next period. So, what understanding are we trying to facilitate here? To understand the financial state of the business each month, and then to identify growth opportunities and pain points, and also help them plan for the next period. So, I have these sample reports, which I'm going to put up on my screen now. Okay. So I have these sample reports here, and just to show us what data we have in here, we have some exchange rate information, we have some customer information, we have a date table, we have a product table, we have a store table as well. And just to show the model, see how everything is related to each other. So it's just a very simple data model, one fact table, product, customer, date, store, and our exchange rate information. And so in here as well, we have a couple of measures that we have created. So let's just see how we can create maybe one or two visuals and see how we can format those visuals to, look um, in a certain way or look presentable, right? So one of the questions we're trying to facilitate an understanding of is what the financial state of the business each month. So looking at that statement, financial state of the business each month, I want you to drop in the chat what visualization option do you think is appropriate? The financial state of the business each month. What visualization option do you think is appropriate for that? Okay, Delvis says a line chart. All right. Rafia also says a line chart. Okay. Is there anyone with any contrary suggestion, or do we all agree with a line chart? Okay, or a table or matrix. Okay. All right. And then we'd explore both options, right? So we have two options, a line chart and a table or matrix, and then we'd explore both options and see what are we able to communicate with both of them. So I'm going to drop in what a line chart, right? I'm assuming well, at least we are familiar with Power BI. So I'll drop in a line chart here, and we say we're doing it by month. So let's say I put in my year month column here. I hope I don't have a theme applied on this already. That'll just spoil everything. Let me see. Uh, I have I have a theme already applied. Anyway, so let's just proceed. So I select my year, month there, and then financial performance. Let's look at what? Let's look at total sales or total profits. Let's say total profit, right? We care about how much profit we are making. And I only have 1 month because I have some filters here. So let's just clear that out. Okay. So I have this visual. This is what Power BI gave me. I created a year month. I put my year and month column on the axis. I added my total sales, and Power BI gave me this, right? Let's just say, okay, for the sake of simplicity, we want to restrict this to just a couple of years. So I'll add in a year slicer here. Make this a list and just select maybe 2018 and 2017, for example, right? Just for illustration purposes, let me make this a drop down. All right. So we have our matrix here, right? About chart rather, showing a line chart communicating total profit by month, right? And it's supposed to show us the financial performance of financial state of the business each month. So we had two options. We had our line chart. Let's try and see our um, matrix. I'll copy and paste this, and then I'll turn this into a matrix, right? So this is a matrix here. Now, what can we do? Or first of just looking at this, what can we do to make this a bit more illustrative of the financial performance? What can we do to make this communicate the financial performance of the business each month. So let me make this just 1 year. All right, so it's a bit more. This is just 2019. All right. So what can we do to this chart to communicate the financial performance each month? So any options, any ideas? And they would also look at the matrix as well to see what we can do as well to communicate the financial state of the business each month. Any ideas? Are there formatting options we can do? Okay, month-on-month profits. Excellent, excellent. Any other ideas? All right, so let's do month-on-month profit. So we're going to compute our month-on-month profit, right? So just create a new measure here. Right, so that'll be a month-on-month percentage growth in in profits. I'll call this, let me zoom in. So total profits month-on-month, and then I can do that. I can do this in a couple of ways. So just do the simple one, which is what, divide the total profits by the, why is this? By the total profits in the previous month. So did that. So I'm not going to try and explain the DAX because that is not the goal of this, but it's just to see how we can communicate the information. So divide it by that, do -1. Okay, so we should have our total profit month on month now. I'll format that as a percentage, and I'll add it first to my matrix, and let's see. So I have my total profit month on month. So I see that was January 2019. I made February 2019, I made 1.8, which is 3% lesser than this. This month I made 60, which is this, I made 734, which is 60% lesser than this. Can I zoom in? Let me see if I can zoom in. Why can't I zoom in? Okay. All right. Okay. So I made this amount, which is less than this and less than that. All right. So we have total profits month to month and month to month percentage change, and we want to try and communicate our total profits month to month. What are options that we can do? First of, let's explore the line chart, right? Now, this line chart, what enhancements can we do to reduce clutter and communicate that information much more appropriately? So like I mentioned, we know that this is total profits by year months, and I have total profits here and total profits and year months here. These are things that I can remove from this visual to reduce the clutter on my visual. So I'll come into my visualizations pane. Apologies that I can't zoom in, and I'll take out my title. Off of that, on my y-axis, I'll take out my title. So I'm left with this. Now, looking at this information, I have a chart title that says total profit by year month. I don't need anyone to tell me that this is my profit and this is my month, because these are what very, very descriptive. What else can I do? I can make my title a bit more uh, stand out a bit more, right? So that when they see this chart, they understand immediately what the chart is talking about. So I can come to my chart here, and in the title, I can change this to maybe monthly profit trend, for example, right? Or total profit per month. Maybe we'll keep it simple. Total profit by month. Now I can still make this stand out a bit more. So I make this, let's say, bold, so that that's the first thing you see. Maybe I reduce the boldness slightly a bit, right? And so I have total profit by month. Now, in Power BI, you have the option to add subtitles. So I can add subtitles if I have a bit more specific information that I want to communicate. And let's say in this information, what I want to communicate is that uh, so we're looking at 1 year. For example, I can say, okay, total profits for 2019 is XYZ, right? Just creating a template. Total profits for 2019 is XYZ, and we recorded the lowest profit in April and the highest. Okay, this is this is too much now. Well, let's keep it at total profit for 2019 is XYZ, and April had and April, and we performed list in April, right? This is some extra information that we can add to this report here. And maybe I want to distinguish this a bit more from the rest of my charts. I can add in maybe like a divider here and make it very, very light, right? So it's not distracting. Okay, and maybe I add a space after my divider just to create a distinction here. You can customize the spacing between spaces below the title, below the subtitle, below the title area, right? A couple of customizations that you can do to make this space out however it is that you want. So let me reduce this, it's too much. All right, so let's keep it as is. Total profit by month. Total profit for 2019 is XYZ, so we can compute that, and we performed list in April. Now, this is looking a bit more explanatory than you naturally would have shared. Now, let's say we want to highlight the specific values in each month, right? So that they can easily see what was the sale amount performed in each month. Now, we can give them summary numbers, right? Rounded off numbers. So I can add data labels to this, for example, add my data labels to this, and then everything is looking all cluttered and stuff. So with my data labels added there, I no longer need my y-axis, right? And this is one way to go about it. But what I would always prefer is the purpose of a line chart is what, like I said, is most times not to communicate specific values, right? You want to communicate trends. So most likely I would leave the y-axis there, take off my series, but then I want to now show if these numbers are good or not. What I can do is to add, let's say, targets. So let's say we had a monthly target of 1.5 million, or let's say 1 million, for example. We had a monthly target of 1 million. I'm trying to give these numbers some meaning so that they understand if our performance is good or not. Right? We are trending down, then we trended up again, but I want to see to highlight where we are performing at a target. So I can add a reference line to this chart and say, okay, this is my monthly target of 1 million, and this is everyone that exceeded it, and this is everyone that did not exceed it. So let's see if we have that option here. So if I come to my Analyze tab, I have a y-axis constant line here. So on the visualization screen, we have what? We have this first one here, this format one, I have Analyze. Come to my y-axis, I say add a line. You can see the line appears there. And what's the value of that line? The value of that line is 1 million, right? And because a reference line, let's say make it dark, make it a bit more subtle, make it that, make it a dotted line or a solid line, just to show that it's a reference point, right? So that's my 1 million mark. Now, automatically, I can see the dates, the points where we exceeded the target and the points where we were below the target. And to make my line a bit more descriptive, maybe it's not bold enough, I make it a darker shade. Then I can add the label of the line, right? It's just showing 1 million. So what is 1 million? Right? What is 1 million? Where is it? So y constant line here, I rename it to target, right? So that's my target. Come down to my data labels here and say where they want to show the number, I want to show the number there. Display units, okay, because it's in millions, show it in millions. It shows 1.0 million. Then I set the style down to show only data value, or I want to show both the name and data value. So I set both. So it says what target 1 million. I make that maybe dark, right? So it's highlighting the data, okay? Target 1 million, and then this is the sales amount of everything. So just looking at this now, we've communicated a bit more information, right, than we would just have the line chart. So we are seeing the trends, right? We came down this month, came down that month, came down this month, came down that month. Is this monthly performance good? Oh, it's good for some months, not good for some other months. We had a target of 1 million. We made that target almost every month, but in March and April, we seem not to have made that target. We've communicated more, facilitated understanding, and even driven the need to further probe the data, right? This is one way that we can make these line charts, enhance this line charts. Another way is to look at this. Let's what else if we wanted to show the specific details, right? Let's say our manager is interested in the specific numbers. What can we do in this chart, right, to make it a bit more interesting? For example, now options that we have to format. So I'll just bring our line chart down and our matrix up. So it's our focus for now. Now, what are things that we can do in this matrix here to make it a bit more descriptive, right? Now, options that you usually have in matrices include number one, I can highlight certain numbers, right? So for my total profit, for example, I can add some elements to it. So I come to cell elements here and say add a data bar, for example. Now, I don't want a data bar that will be so dark that I won't see the colors. I can choose something with a lighter color, maybe lighter gray or a lighter orange or a lighter blue, so something like that. And I click OK, right? Just highlights the numbers nicely. But a neat little trick, I'll just show you guys a neat little trick that you can use is if I clear that off, right? So I'll clear this off on my report. I'll just drag in my total profit measure again into my visual, right? So now I have two total profit measures. And then for the second one, I'll just rename it with an underscore, right? Just to hide total. Oh, okay. This is not the technique. Let me see. All right. So the technique is this. We would create another version of our total profits, for example. So say right click, new measure, and it's just going to be a reference of total profits, right? So we create another total profit just to enhance. So I have total profits two, so two is equals to just reference the same total profit that we had before. So that's my total profit, right? It's just the same exact thing, right? So I'll now add that into my visual. So I'll drag total profit 2 in here. But then for total profit 2, I'll just rename it and just put an underscore, right? Or a full stop, for example. And then it hides the header. Now what I would do with that second total profit is I'll now go to my format options here, go to cell elements, for example, and select that second one, and then add the data bars to this one. So I'll come now to the options of my data bars. Let's say I choose a color that is much more not too noisy. And then once I do that, I'll now select this option here that says show bar only. And I select show bar only, I click OK, and I see what happens, right? It's almost as if I have like a nice bar chart inside of my matrix, right? And this has communicated some more information here. You have other options as well. You can turn off the row subtotals, for example, right? Turn on the rows of totals, for example, and then you just have these numbers here. So now that we have our total profit, we have a nice little representation of which months performed the most, even within this matrix. So we can see the specific numbers. We can almost see which months performed the most, which months performed the least. And then for our month-to-month trade, we may want to highlight specifically, right, which month was performing least or which month was performing worst. So what can I do? I'll come to my cell elements here under my formatting options for my total profits, and then I will select total profit month to month. What I want to do is to what? Add a font color and a background color. So let's do the background color first. Then when I do my background color, I select that FX icon, and I want to just do a conditional formatting based on some rules. Now, I mentioned that it's good to use measures to drive some of these, but for the purpose of our training today or our session today, I'm just going to use the features we have in Power BI. So I'll change this format style to rules, and then I'll say number. So if it is greater than or equal to 0 and less than a very big number, let's say 999999999, meaning that it is positive, I want you to give it a nice green. All right, let's do for a nice background green that is not too shouty, not too, let's say make it green. Click new row and say, okay, if it is greater than, so unfortunately, there's no less than in here. So you have to say if it is greater than negative, very high number, and it is less than 0, then we want to make it red. So go to more colors, choose red, choose a nice light red for the background, and click OK. And you see immediately Power BI highlights the red parts. So to create a bit of contrast as well for my text, I can format my font colors. So I'll go back to my matrix, come to the format options here, cell elements, go to font color, then choose the FX icon again, and basically repeat the process I just did. Say rules. If it is greater than, change this to number, greater than or equal to 0 and less than 9999999. And then I'll make that one, it's a green, but it's going to be a darker green so that it's going to show up on my light green, right? So I'll look for that nice dark green that will show up there. I think that's fine. Maybe we'll make it a bit darker. Let's make it dark. Okay, then add a new row. I'll just a number. So okay, this is minus 9999999, unfortunately. And then we'll make this a dark red. Right, so let's look for a nice dark red that will contrast on that light red background. Think that's okay. I click OK, and then we have this. So our numbers are legible on the chart. Everything seems to be looking fine. So what else can we do? Make things a bit more descriptive. So instead of year months, we can just call this month. So I'll come here, just call this month. And then for our total profit, I think total profit is still fine. For our total profit month to month, I can just create this to month on month percentage, right? And then it's just month to month percentage. You can see the total profit, specific value, which one was high and which one was the profits, right? So this is just a way to enhance that information that we have just talked about, right? You could have just created a blank. So if I come back to what it is that we had in mind, or what the default Power BI gave us, which was just what year, month, total profit, and this is what we could have presented compared to that, or with our line charts, we could have just done what was the default Power BI gave us. If we say line charts here, we do year, month, and total profit, and this was the default Power BI gave us. So comparing both of them, the right to the left and the left to the right, you see that when you take control of what it is that Power BI is giving you, or what it is that you're trying to communicate, then you're able to communicate a bit more effectively, right? Certain numbers. So in the interest of time, this is where we'll stop. Maybe some other time we'll go into a bit more nitty gritties of some um, tips and techniques to achieve certain visualization features in Power BI. But for now, I think we can run with this. So if you have any questions right now, would be the time to ask. Do I still have Polumi on the call? Okay, it's not on the call. All right. So if you have questions now about anything that we've discussed so far, you can do well to unmute and ask your questions. And if you have any feedback that you want to share, you can do well to share that feedback. So over to you, Pelumi.
All right. Thank you very much. That was a whole lot. Sincerely, you've given us a whole lot. So let's appreciate Bolaji for that. He actually gave us a whole lot of tips on how we can visualize our data, even starting from the theoretical aspects and also to the practical aspects. So just because our time is fast spent, okay, do you have anyone with question? Okay, just saw someone drop a question that please, how do I remove outlier in Power BI?
Hmm. How do you remove outliers in Power BI? Well, um, the first thing I would ask you is what's the reason for the outlier, right? What's the reason for the outlier? So outliers are not always a bad thing. Okay, outliers can come up as a result of many things. Is it data error? Is it um data error? Are they actually true outliers? Are they outliers that are actually part of your data? Would they skew your data, or would they actually give you more insight into the data that you're doing? So outliers are not always bad, and knowing how to remove it would depend on what the source of the outlier is, right? What's the source of the outlier? So there's a lot more questions I need to ask before I can tell you, okay, this is an option for you to explore. So yeah, I hope that answers. It doesn't answer your question, but it gives you a bit more understanding into what you should consider before you say you want to remove an outlier in Power BI.
All right, thank you very much, Balaji, for that. So if if his answer is not sufficient, you can always reach out to him. You can see his Twitter is there, his LinkedIn is there, and I think his portfolio. You can check his portfolio. So yeah, so Balaji has an interesting things there. So if there's any question you want to ask, if that is not clear to you, you can always reach out to him, and then he will be happy to respond to you. Okay, one more last thing. Do we have any question before we go for today? Any question? Okay, I would take that as a no. So thank you very much, Bolaji. Really appreciate your time. So if possible, we may have part two of this because it was an interesting session, and even myself, I actually learned a lot. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I penned down some things. If we can have part two of this, would be glad. Okay, but we'll discuss. We'll discuss about that. So thank you very much. Yeah,
All
because
right. Thank you for having me
squeezing
as
these
well.
2 hours, yeah, move out 2 hours out of your time. It's not something easy. If you have to pay for this, we don't even have the money. So thank you very much for that, and for everyone that was and I was available for the session. Really appreciate your time also. Yeah, so all what we've learned today, just to let's try as much as possible to put it into practice because it's not just only listening or seeing what's been done. You need to also practice yourself. Yeah, it's very easy to think that these things will be easy when seeing the facilitator doing it, but it's when you try it yourself, you know that I know this thing or I don't know it. And so also the recording of this will be shared, so we'll share it online, Twitter, LinkedIn when we upload it on them on the YouTube. So you can also watch and see how Bolaji did some things in Power BI and some explanation when he was talking about the theory aspect of data visualization generally. So, on this note, for this is for 12. So we'll see next month by God's grace. So we should have our meetup again in June. That's June, and that will be the last Saturday in June. So we'll see again. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and let's do well to enjoy the rest of our evening. Bye, everyone.
All right, guys. Bye.
Thank you, Balaji.